Dimension 20 is an actual play show where performers and comedians tell a story through the mechanics of a tabletop role-playing game, like Dungeons & Dragons. Dimension 20 at this point consists of over 20 different seasons of campaigns, spanning different genres and casts. There's hundreds of hours of this show, and I think it should be a cosplay. So I'm making that. I want to make a costume that's about the show itself instead of a specific game or character, which is tricky when each campaign is so intentionally unique. Luckily, this kind of thing is like the background radiation of who I am as a person. I first had this idea almost 4 years ago when I was watching maybe the second episode of Unsleeping City. The filming for the show takes place in a set called the Dome because it was originally a modified playground dome. What if I cosplayed that? The dome is where the magic happens. It's constantly changing to match the vibes, but intentionally grounded in these geometric shapes. The same way D&D play is based in tiny geodesic shapes we call dice. And I'm gonna get into the way this idea has been marinating into something I can actually create real soon, and what specifically I find so inspiring about this show a bit later. But for right now, I just kinda wanna jump in and start crafting. There's actually a short documentary about production designer Rick Perry, who designed the original dome and whose art team builds all the stunning sets and minis and terrain. I haven't seen it yet, so I'm gonna throw it on while I sketch my initial rendering. Just as far as basic silhouette stuff, I am definitely thinking queen, maybe even fairy queen. I've got a hoop skirt lying around. I'd love to make some drapey sleeves and cool back-mounted stuff later, and actually, if I go for a fairy queen design, I think I can start with one of my favorite things to make, an embellished corset. One of my big takeaways from the Rick Perry documentary is he mentioned the idea of kit bashing, where to build these sets and miniatures for Dimension 20, a lot of the times they're pulling from different existing models and smashing them together so that way they're not building from scratch. And I love this because I love finding out these specific terms that different craft subcultures have for what is spiritually the same thing. That feels really similar to what I'm doing, pulling from my pattern binder, yoinking shit I have already made to repurpose into this build. I didn't draft a corset from scratch. I took the pattern that I did draft from scratch for my 2019 Her Universe build. I chucked together a lightning fast mock-up for the underbust cincher. I made a few adjustments, marked some stuff, and then I seam ripped it. The fit on this is not perfect, but I think it's gonna be fine once I get all of the layers and all of the boning in. Moving fast on this build right now means I'm not spending the extra couple of hours fiddling with the fit. It also means I'm just grabbing whatever twill tape I have lying around in my stash to make the boning channels. Usually I do really love to make a garment that matches the aesthetic of the outside on the inside, but sometimes you just need it to work. And I knew I could knock out the support layer of this quick little corset in just a few hours if I did that. I'm using plain old black canvas for the support layer, but when it comes to the fashion fabric, the part that's going to be on the outside for everyone to see, I am doing interfacing crimes. The color palette for this build has been really tricky to nail down. I mean, what color is Dimension 20? I'm trying to lean into the spacey aesthetic and multicolor vibe of some of their promo pictures, and of course the iconic turquoise, seafoam green geometric lines that cut through a lot of their graphics. So in my dreams, I'm making this corset out of like a holographic rainbow fabric, but that is actually incredibly difficult to find. After going to at least 7 different stores, the only fabric I found that came even close to this dream was a foil hollow spandex. I found this fabric in Stretch House and I picked up a yard each of 2 different dot patterns. One is very small dots in a grid and the other is slightly bigger and in more of a hexagonal pattern. And of course I am backing these with canvas to try and take that stretch out of the spandex as best I can. So even though it is the stretchiest stretch fabric, I'm gonna be trying to treat it like it is the most unmoving woven fabric. We'll see how it works out. Honestly, the trickiest part is that I can't use my usual heavy hand with an iron. I tend to press the absolute shit out of things, and I've learned from doing tests that the foil really loses a lot of its luster if it gets steamed too heavily. I just can't play quite as fast and loose as I usually do, otherwise I will ruin the fabric. And to quickly show and tell, there is a reason why I'm constructing this corset in 2 separate layers. They're just gonna be joined at the top and bottom, and that is because I really want to sew on some decorations to the outside of the corset. It's gonna be so much easier to do that in this layer instead of trying to like avoid boning channels and stuff. Listen, they won't tell you this in school, but sometimes interfacing crimes do pay, or at least I hope they will. We'll find out together. So to get the kind of crisscrossing turquoise seafoam green line effect, I'm just gonna be using plain old satin ribbon to put a geometric outline in the corset. I looked at so many trims that were more exciting and more flashy than satin ribbon, but they were all too busy when compared with that hollow fabric. The simplicity of satin ribbon I think is really gonna pop, and I think I'm also gonna do a satin stitch along the edges to really make sure that there's contrast between that and the corset. So yeah, I'm gonna start spray and bonding that stuff down, and soon this will be a whole corset. It's not a coincidence that Dimension 20 has been such a creatively load-bearing force in my life as a person who makes things with their hands. Craftspeople love stuff like podcasts and YouTube. We love the kind of media that's immersive through great storytelling because that's the best kind of flow state to be in. We love media that's long because we've got a lot of work to do. 8 episodes is not a real season of TV, and it's not enough to carry me through a project. And we love media that doesn't ask undivided visual attention of us. I've got to keep focused on this satin stitching, but not so much that I can't keep my eye on Jacob Wysocki's genius improv. Dimension 20 has been my companion throughout the last, 3 years of full-time making content about crafting and cosplay, so I need this project to capture that. I want to put everything that I love about the full breadth of everything about Dimension 20 in a single garment. Our plate is very full right now. There's a lot on it. And before I finish decorating this corset, I need to tell you about this rendering and all of the ideas in my head. We definitely need to make a more tangible action plan for this project, and that's where friend of the channel Milanote is gonna jump on in. Real talk, I've been using Milanote to organize pretty much everything in my life since working with them this spring. Like, I fully used Milanote to structure the script for my Her Universe deep dive last month. And to be so honest right now, I'm super excited they're sponsoring this video, but I need you to know that I am going to be making the plan for the rest of this costume right now. Like, I would recommend sticking around or you're gonna be missing some key stuff. We love a drag and drop to get started. I really like the balance Milanote has of like structure and aesthetic flexibility as an organizational tool. I'm gonna bring in a GIF of the Dimension 20 logo, and I made a quick title in Photoshop. I've talked about how tricky the color scheme for this project is, so I'm gonna pull in some color swatches from my rendering on the side here. It's super helpful to see them at a glance in my kind of main hub. If I made a single to-do list, I think I would lose my mind, so I'm gonna break this rendering into subboards for the skirts, the corset, the mask, and the spires. That's what I'm calling all the back-mounted nonsense. Those are the main phases. And I do really think I need an overarching inspo board here, something I can quick reference for the core visual language of this build. Oh, that should be our Dungeon Master's guide. Wait, I just decided. Feeling good about this home base so far, so it's time to doodle some silly little sparkles. They're mandatory. They're load-bearing. I'm gonna change the icons on here real quick. Can you believe Milanote already has little outlines for a D4 through a D20 built in? I would pay so much money to use little geometric dice outlines and all my organizing. But Milanote is free, by the way, with no time limit. It's huge news for my rhinestone budget. We're gonna get to rhinestones soon, but I need to start with the DMG now that our home base is done. And hey, remember how I said that I have been using Milanote all year? I actually already started a super rough mood board for this project months ago, before I even drew the rendering. You can see this board when you rewatch the video about the Lavender Town Witch outfit. We do Easter eggs here on the Lizardly channel. I'm gonna grab those images, and I'm also going to pull some inspiration from Pinterest. I use the Milanote web clipper on Firefox to save images directly to the app. It's way easier than remembering to clear out my downloads folder. They all just populate in an unsorted bin on the side. It's super handy. And for this board, I'm really thinking about how I can combine these different aesthetics. The dome is clean and geometric and like LED lighting and super tight visuals, and Fairy Queens are like messy and organic. They're dramatic and fantasy art inspired. I'm pulling from cosplayers I love and runway collections and the drama of Venetian carnival silhouettes. Having this visual quick reference is going to help me so much the next time I'm stuck in the weeds, man. Now that we're diving into subboards for the different phases, I do think I'm gonna use one of Milanote's templates so I can get my ideas ironed out. If you thought it was weird I drew the dome skirt white, that's because I'm actually using fiber optic fabric. This is fabric that lights up and changes colors, and I've never worked with it before, and oh my god, I hope I don't ruin it. I've been working on that for a few weeks already, and I belatedly realized that I should rewatch the fiber optic crafting videos I saw ages ago from creators like Hazariel. So I'm consolidating those here. The sheer engineering of builds like Sky Gets Fancy's Epcot gown is so inspiring. This dome skirt is gonna require a lot of math and a big ol' to-do list. This is giving me a much better idea of what I've already done and what I still need to do. Skipping over to the geometric dice mask, the face dome, as one of my patrons called it. Some algorithm showed me Phantomacy's work this summer, and I'm absolutely obsessed. Even if I'm not directly mimicking the specific look, the concept is such a direct inspiration here. I'm gonna be using the same fursuiting buckram I used for my Korok mask. I've been heavily referencing some hat making and millinery blogs I've got to consolidate in one spot here. I'm not sure what the bright turquoise lines are gonna be yet, but that's what to-do lists are for, and I hope you enjoy the cheeky little names I'm giving these sections. I'm also probably gonna make a neck corset of some kind with dice details for that ethereal vibe. Moving on to the spires, this is the thing I truly have not started. What I know right now is this. I have spent months trying to come up with an aspect of this costume that will represent each individual season of Dimension 20 in a way that I can add on to as new seasons are released. I won't say too much more now, but you're welcome to draw conclusions based on the board I'm building right now. So that brings us to the corset, the part we are doing right now. You've already met the hollow spandex that I'm making the fashion layer out of and the seafoam satin ribbon details, but what we're gonna get to soon is the embellishment. I actually sourced these big acrylic stones first and then picked out the rainbow spandex to match them. In the rendering, I just used that phone pic zoomed in as the corset color. Designing this undershirt honestly gave me a lot of trouble for reasons we'll get into, but I landed on a kind of classic off-the-shoulder fantasy top. I might end up dyeing a gradient, I might end up doing some more stoning. I'm gonna make a shopping list here so I can pull all this up the next time I'm in the garment district. My creative work always needs to be able to switch between desktop and mobile, and I'm giving major props for how easy it is to access this board when I'm in Midtown. I don't think any two people plan projects exactly the same way. We all need some things to be structured and some things to be flexible. That's probably why I use milanote for so many things, because it really feels like you can make plans the way you want to. Sign up for milanote today using the link in the description. It is free without a time limit. And get started on your next creative adventure. I did get more rhinestones. We've got a lot to talk about back in Brooklyn once I finish stitching down that ribbon. Honestly, the black satin stitching along the edges of the ribbon here probably took a solid 2 hours, but I knew it would be worth it to get that really high contrast between the ribbon and the hollow of the corset. I also did 2 layers of the ribbon because it was pretty transparent with just a single layer, and I'm not ashamed of who I am as a person. I did hand-baste down the first layer of ribbon. What more do you want from me at this point? It's always a slightly different reason why I'm hand basting. In this case, it's because I can't press this fabric. The only way that I can get these seams to lay even a little bit flat is if I'm physically tying the seam allowance back with a needle and thread. And you know what? At the end of the day, look at how it turned out. Who can be mad about this? The haters, you should hand baste it. So now that all the sewn embellishment is done, I am going to bring this together with the structural layer. I'm gonna pop some grommets on. This was the last bit of sewing embellishment I needed to do on the fashion layer. I'm gonna now bring this together with the structural layer. Gonna pop some grommets on there. Gonna bind the edges, probably with the same spandex fabric. And then hopefully later in the day, I can get started on the reason why I wanted to make this corset in the first place, which is rhinestones. Once I did get the grommets and binding the edges all taken care of, I grabbed literally the twine we use for recycling cardboard just to make sure that this was a sleigh on the dress form. The base is looking so clean, but we don't have time to linger because I'm like foaming at the mouth to start getting some embellishment on there. My last couple projects haven't had the vibes for rhinestones. Like, I am realizing it's been low-key years since I designed a piece like this where the rhinestones are the main event. I mentioned that sourcing these multicolor acrylic gems was actually my first step to figuring out the color scheme for this corset, but I didn't tell you where I got them from. High Trim and Feathers. This specific store is more than just my favorite spot in the garment district, which it is, it's also actually the source of all my powers. I've been shopping at this store for over a decade. I've shopped here over 3 different location changes. This is where my essence would regenerate if I were a vampire. What I love about these multicolored gems is how they look rainbow. It's giving Roy G. Biv, but really they're more like 4 separate colors instead of a full spectrum. I've grabbed a few different size and shape variations that I'm laying down before gluing. It's an art, not a science, to get them looking organic and well-spaced. This got done the night before I left for DragonCon. I had really wanted to get this costume wearable for the Dimension 20 meetup there, but the universe had other plans, so I ended up just wearing this corset. I always use E6000 for rhinestones, but make sure you crack that window open and put on a respirator when you're working. To fill in the spaces between the big guys, I'm gonna pull out my bulk rhinestone stash. I've got a lot of AB stones on hand. Those are the ones that have the iridescent two-tone effect, and I end up going with 4 different colors of rhinestone, as well as the uncolored crystal AB. Stoning a garment will always be my favorite part of the process, and bringing this level of finish to a garment that means so much to me was especially transcendent. When I wore this at DragonCon, I just borrowed a Ren Fair shirt from my bestie to wear to the meetup. It was actually so special to see everyone there in their cosplays and get little bracelets. I had a fantastic time, and don't worry, I'm gonna give you a real ass reveal soon. But I can't call the corset done until I make something to go underneath of it. When you watch back the time-lapse of me figuring out this costume in Procreate, a very funny truth is revealed. I really struggled with the shirt that's going to go under this corset. I wasn't clicking with any of the inspiration I was looking at. I couldn't figure out why nothing was landing. It was like my brain was bouncing off of this part of my body. And then I realized that, oh ho ho, I think an old villain is back again. I design most of my cosplays so that I can wear a binder or at least have a really de-emphasized titty area, but an underbust corset highlights the bust. There's no way around it, and I still have one. Now, I honestly don't mind this particular garment having an emphasized bust. That to me makes sense for the amount of gender we've got in here. I just need to find the middle ground between what works for the garment and what works for me as a trans person. This is also tricky in a tangible way as someone who's planning on having top surgery. My measurements are going to be very different in a couple of years, and I would rather account for that now. What I finally landed on is an off-the-shoulder top, and I'm actually going to make that out of stretch fabric to accommodate those changes. I picked up a nice solid poly lycra fabric from Mood and cobbled together a few different patterns to make this base shirt. And a few days ago, I did open chest binding with trans tape to see if it'd look okay before I did the rest of the sewing. There's princess seams in the front and back, and my edges are just finished with a zigzag stitch. I also picked up this gorgeous poly organza from, I think, Hamed. It's mostly like straight up blue, but in certain drapes, you can see this really vibrant, like metallic turquoise that comes through. I think what I'm gonna do is take the sleeves off of this base shirt and cut some strips of this, gather it with a ruffle, and just tack it down and see if I can get some nice vertical gathers happening here. These funky little bell sleeves are gonna need to be gathered, and then I'm gonna kind of fake the rest of the flow of the sleeve with this organza. It's gonna get a little experimental. I don't know, we'll see. To be so honest with you, I am going to will this top into existence through the power of fabric rectangles. After pinning these tests to my dress form, I realized that I really like the fullness I get out of the full 60-inch bolt width. So I'm using my soldering iron to finish the raw edges of these giant rectangles since it's a synthetic, and I'm making a few little fit adjustments to that base shirt we made, like straightening out the sweetheart neckline and adding some elastic to support everything. But while I'm really gonna start cooking here, turning all this fabric into something wearable, I am realizing that up to this point in the video, I have told you like 2 things total about Dimension 20, and that's not gonna cut it on this channel. That is unacceptable. No fucking way am I going to resist the urge to tell you more about what makes this show so special and why I'm cosplaying from it. So let's start with the foundations. What the fuck is an actual play? So I could do the classic YouTuber thing here and give you a timeline of D&D's first publication 50 years ago in 1974. Or I could go even further back and tell you about its origins in war games that are way more about tactics and strategy like Warhammer, and how D&D evolved out of that character-agnostic gameplay. I could even really give into my baser instincts and tell us all about how humans have been making and rolling dice since before recorded history. Like millennia ago, the Sumerians never had to look at a Cybertruck, but they had D4-based gameplay systems. But that doesn't really capture what it's like to play D&D, and instead of trying to tell you, I'm gonna let someone else show you. This clip was posted by Ryan Immel over on TikTok with some great commentary, which is where I saw it. All you need to know right now is that John Bernthal knows literally nothing about Dungeons and Dragons.
I don't know what Dungeons and Dragons, like I don't, it's like a game, but like you imagine you're like in the game.
And Deborah Ann Wall is a widely respected dungeon master who runs multiple actual plays.
Kind of. I mean, it's just yeah, it's just a collaborative storytelling.
She gives a really spot-on rundown of the basic setup between the DM and the players, that she as a DM or GM has a unique role in establishing scenarios and presenting choices and consequences for the players to engage with. She tells John that players don't just declare what their player does, easy peasy, they usually have to roll for it to see if they can. In D&D, that dice roll for most stuff is a d20, and your character will have a number that gets added or subtracted from what you roll based on how good they are at whatever's going on. She could have kept going here, she could have talked about combat or maybe the different skill categories we see in 5th edition, but instead she does this.
You wanna play D&D?
I mean, I'll try. I mean, what do you think?
No,
I'd
like
be able to do it?
literally right now.
She describes this scenario to John. She tells him, you know, you're walking in the woods at night, you've got a bow and a sword on you. It's dummy dark and you hear a crack off in the distance.
Something large stepped on the branch. What would you do?
First thing, how far away is the crack?
Give me a perception check. So then you roll dice and we'd see how perceptive you are.
And even without dice, with her just throwing out random numbers as examples, she talks John through his own decisions, how he encounters an owlbear, and what he does next. I'd play you the whole thing, but honestly, I don't know how cool Frank Castle is about fair use. I really don't need the Punisher copyright claiming my video. This clip was so sick for a lot of people in the TTRPG community, because you can see John go from knowing nothing about the game to literally...
I'd be like, yo, are you my friend or are you my foe?
Fantastic. You speak to it?
Yeah, I try.
Give me an animal handling check.
in 90 seconds flat. This is D&D. It's collaboratively telling a story. It's combining chance and basic math and imagination to craft a shared experience. It fucking rules. So an actual play is an extension of that. What if instead of creating a meaningful narrative for everyone at the table, you made one for an external audience? I know a lot of you guys already know this. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. No child left behind. Go fuck yourself, George W. Bush. Precursors to this idea have existed pretty much as far back as the early internet had the capability to host audio and video files. I've been using the term D&D and TTRPG pretty interchangeably so far, but D&D is just one TTRPG. There are so many other game systems that achieve the same storytelling magic. But when it comes to actual plays as a genre, the ubiquity of 2014's 5th edition is a huge part of that initial explosion of popularity. Like a lot of you probably, the first actual play I encountered was The Adventure Zone. This podcast began in the summer of 2014, just a few weeks after Wizards of the Coast published a free PDF starter set for 5e. To be clear about that, The Adventure Zone actually predates the 5th edition Player's Handbook. By like a day, but still. That very first campaign was DM'd by Griffin McElroy and played by his two older brothers, Justin and Travis, and his dad, Clint. It started as a one-off episode on the brothers' established comedy podcast, but later that winter became its own show. And The Adventure Zone is still going today. I love a lot of their newer seasons like Ethersea and Dracula, but that very first game that they started in 2014 is to me a once-in-a-lifetime story. It's been said that this show is like a car that learned to fly. It started as caps lock comedy, nothing but deliriously stupid goofs, and somehow over 3 years of gameplay became one of the most profound and moving narratives I have ever experienced. Critical Role started not long after Taz in early 2015. Where The Adventure Zone had its origin in a comedy podcast, Critical Role came out of a home game that just so happened to be played by working voice actors. Instead of an audio-only podcast that was edited after sessions, Crit Role was live-streamed weekly with video of the cast playing. I highly recommend M. Friedman's Polygon article about the first decade of actual play as a genre and the way Critical Role especially shaped the landscape. She talks about how their multi-camera overlays established the format that so many live stream shows now use. She says the layout eliminated the awkward elements of the wide-angle lenses and multi-purpose tables, cables, and other clutter. By cropping and arranging, it showed all angles of a table simultaneously live. Player reactions became a significant part of that audience experience, leading to some of the most memorable moments in the show. I personally fell off of Crit Role a while back, but I will never forget the energy at the table when Laura Bailey changed the course of an entire campaign by weaponizing a cupcake. Like, where were you when the Dust of Deliciousness happened? Critical Role has grown from a single streamed game to a whole network of various streamed web series, a publishing imprint, a charity foundation, and even an animated adaptation of their first campaign. But I want to be clear, the explosive growth of this young genre isn't limited to a handful of big-name players. There's exceptional storytelling happening on channels that don't have millions of subscribers. I highly recommend Transplaner, which is an all-trans and POC-led studio putting out incredible work. Their shows are like deliciously dramatic and dark. You might have already seen clips of them on GM Connie Chang's TikTok. If there is a lesser-known actual play that really deserves some shine, please tell me about it in the comments. The landscape of actual play is gloriously vast and at its best made up of creators who inspire each other to tell even more innovative stories. Griffin McElroy was open about how much Friends at the Table shaped his DMing, and Brendan Lee Mulligan cited Not Another D&D podcast as a big inspiration. So let's talk about Brendan Lee Mulligan, the creator of Dimension 20. How does Dimension 20 fit into this ecosystem, and what makes it so special in an already stellar field? And you know, while I figure out this funny sleeve situation, I think I'm gonna start Misfits and Magic, actually. There are so few seasons of Dimension 20 that I haven't watched at this point. I'm willing to bet by the end of this project, I will have seen absolutely all of it. In the fall of 2018, College Humor was in trouble. Honestly, it would continue to be in hot f***ing water for a few years. The full story of this comedy media production company is an internet-era tragedy and also redemption arc, and we're gonna go more in-depth in a future video. What you need to know right now is that in 2018, the company announced Dropout, a subscription-based platform with exclusive shows. Dimension 20 was among the flagship shows advertised at launch, created by Brendan Lee Mulligan. Brendan had been in like the periphery of College Humor's work for a while, but never quite as the star player until this. In an interview with Vulture, Sam Reich talks about the very first time he saw Brennan GM. He says, "I knew immediately that it was something really special. There've been a small handful of times in the long history of our company where I've witnessed someone and gone, that's a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Brennan is one of those times." The flagship season of Dimension 20 is Fantasy High, where Taz and Crit Roll's first campaigns ended up being these like sweeping epics encompassing years of exponentially evolving storytelling. Fantasy High is 17 episodes flat, because Dimension 20 was never meant to be a single campaign. There was a capacity for change and flexibility intentionally baked into this show from the very start. So Fantasy High is a light-hearted high school adventure. It's like a pastiche of John Hughes movies, but set in D&D fantasy world. So your shitty rich kid jock comes from a pirate family. Your angsty rebellious girl is finding out she's half demon. There's detention and prom, and there's also prophecies and dragons. It's a great hook for an actual play. And this, the strong hook, is one one of Dimension 20's most defining traits. Because each campaign is totally different, because you are starting from square one every single time, the premises cannot be muddy. While this first season was airing on Dropout, the same cast of players was already filming a second season called The Unsleeping City. What if magic were real in contemporary New York City? That is the second season of this show. Except actually, the response to Fantasy High was so beyond what anyone had expected, the production team decided to meet that moment.
We realized very quickly into season 1 that they weren't going to wait for season 2. They were demanding more from us. And so what we decided to do in answer to that was have mini seasons in between the big seasons.
So I was lying to you. I love lying. It's why I became a YouTuber. The second season of Dimension 20 was actually Escape from the Bloodkeep. The runtime is shorter at 10 episodes. There's fresh faces in the cast, including the delightful Matt Mercer from Crit Role, and that game takes us into basically Mordor to answer the question, what did all of Sauron's guys do the moment the ring was destroyed? When I look at the kind of early equilibrium that Dimension 20 finds here in its first year and a half, it's really cool to think about where they grew from this initial game plan. Especially because, like, to be honest, Dimension 20 as a video production has been beautiful from the jump. Except for one experimental season, episodes are all filmed across multiple cameras and gorgeously edited into runtimes that have all the ease of gameplay between friends without the pitfalls of going live. Their post-production team adds character art and maps and sound effects and music, and we've already talked a little bit about the art department led by Rick Perry. There's a handful of seasons with digital environments that are equally deserving of praise, but I think the heart and soul of this show will always trace back to the tangible handcraft here. In October 2019, I was in the audience for an Adventure Zone live show here in Brooklyn in the King's Theater. I think it was after intermission that they announced that the four of them, the McElroys, were going to be on the next season of this show that I had barely heard of. They played the trailer for Tiny Heist right then and there, which is like The Borrowers, but with crime. So you see, in 2019, I was already part of the actual play ecosystem as an audience member. It's because of my years watching this genre grow and evolve that I ended up watching my first Dimension 20 campaign. And 5 years later, here I am, putting the finishing touches on the very first part of a cosplay that's going to try and celebrate everything this show is. When I started Tiny Heist, I remember thinking to myself that this guy at the head of the table had a really tall order ahead of him to try and DM a crew that was 2/3 biofam. I remember becoming kind of mesmerized at how effortless Brennan made everything seem. Like, I knew by then that DMing, period, let alone for a show, asks you to balance like 16 different contradicting skill sets at once. Brennan doesn't just make it look easy, he makes it look like the most fun a human being can ever hope to have in this wretched grind we call life. I've been thinking of this first video as kind of the what of Dimension 20, and next time I want to talk about who. The show would not have come into existence without Brennan Lee Mulligan's unrelenting imagination and enthusiasm, and it wouldn't have evolved to have the depth of storytelling we see on it today without Abria Iyengar. I want to talk about the people and perspectives that make this show into the one that I love so much. And that's where we're going to pick up next time on the Dimension 20 Fairy Queen Dome Gown. Tune in next week to see, well, it's not gonna be next week. I still need to make 2 goddamn skirts, but I'll see you there. And hey, if you'll be at the Dimension 20 live show at Madison Square Garden this January, maybe you'll see all this there. I mean, I don't think they'll let me wear a hoop skirt there, but I can maybe wear some of it. Time-sensitive thing really fast, if you're watching this when it's fresh, I am running a special offer on my Patreon literally right now. From now until December 7th, if you pledge at $5 a month or higher, I'm sending you a signed mini print of my Lavender Town Witch cosplay. This is literally the only time you'll be able to get these, and look how cool they look. I post all my work in progress stuff over there. I do crafting live streams and monthly bonus update videos. There's physical rewards at higher tiers. I just finished doing a huge reorganize over there, so it's genuinely a really great time to join. My patrons helped me figure out the script for this video, and I've just got a lot of plans there for next year, so I hope you join the crew and get yourself one of these bad boys. And I want to give a special thank you to Camille Mack Harris, Grace Lilly, Analic, Phantom Angel 1245, Adoilable, Megan Von Ackerman, Turson, Maggie Holden, Larzard, Arden Winner, KFry84, and Eli. Thank you so much to The Littlest Pickle, Ariane Librecht, Lulu Rush Cosplay, Stephanie C, and Hust, and a huge thank you to Kendrick, Thomas Drury Wang, Toria, and Nami Sparrow. If you enjoyed this video, a like and a thoughtful comment really helps it reach more eyes. The thoughtfulness is just for me though, because I like to read that. And as always, our collective liberation is going to require imagination for us to see a better world than the one we're in right now. So I hope you do something for your imagination today. Maybe it's making something with your hands, maybe it's connecting to a narrative you find inspiring. To me, that's how I get the capacity to do the hard work ahead of us. So stay weird, stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one.